We are live. Hope you guys are doing good. If you're watching this in the future, looking forward to chatting with you guys today. And we'll see who jumps on. I've got the head, shoulders, knees, and toes song stuck in my head because my daughter was listening to that. She's 19 months old, and she was listening to Father Abraham and Many Sons yesterday. Father Abraham and many sons, and many sons and Father Abraham, and I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm. Anybody know that song? Okay, we got some people. Hope you're doing well. Let me know in the chat how you're doing. Selly, good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Just realized I've got a rogue here. Yankee 610, how are you? Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. So if you guys have any questions about anxiety, panic attacks, depersonalization, realization, trauma. Oh, Thomas from the program. Wonderful. Well, glad to have you on here, buddy. My cat's here, actually. And then I try to pet her and she runs away. What's up, Harry Morgan? Hope you're well. So, the purpose of these live streams is to educate and spread awareness and encourage, give hope. So if you guys have any kind of situations that you want to share with me related to anxiety, panic attacks, depersonalization, realization, trauma, things like that, I'd be happy to do my best to educate you. Of course, I'm just sharing my opinion. Just know that. Ziri, what's up? Good to see you. Harry Morgan says, is it normal to become hyper aware of your vision? So when you're looking around, you just become so much more aware. Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you enter fight or flight response, or even the freeze response, depending on the situation, there's a lot of visual disturbances, particularly because the pupils become dilated. And so you're letting in a lot more of your surroundings. But what you're saying is becoming hyper aware of your vision. So yeah, so in fight or flight response, you can enter what's called a hypervigilant state. And whenever you're in a hypervigilant state, you become hyper aware of a lot of things, not even just your vision. You become hyper aware of your surroundings, hyper aware of things happening in your body. Very, very common. What's up, Phil G? And Selly or Thomas, I would actually ask you to not be on these live streams, since you're in my program, just because it's very different. And so I would probably hop off here and just join. We actually have a call today at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. That would be the best place to be. Ziri says, I got a question. It's hard to answer that question, buddy. Yeah, could you frame that in the form of a question so I can kind of, understand a little bit? But yeah, guys, keep shooting me questions. Let me know the situation that you're in, especially as it relates to relationships. I'd be happy to help out, give some advice about that. Maybe you're in a situation relationally that you have some questions about, whether it's narcissistic abuse, or maybe people don't understand your symptoms, or just things like that. I'd be happy to help. How can I fully process emotion? So you have to let them peak. They have to get to max intensity. And that's what most people don't allow to happen. Most people will feel their emotions. Well, I say that. Most people don't feel their emotions. Most people tend to suppress their emotions. And this is either, directly taught to them by their caregiver growing up. In other words, they've got a father or a mother or a grandpa or grandma, whoever's raising them, that says, hey, we don't deal with emotions, right? Especially men, but not limited to men, of course, but especially as men, there seems to be a tendency um, for fathers to teach their sons or daughters that emotions make you weak, which is absolutely not true at all. But it affects both male and female. Um, but also, the other reason why we tend to suppress our emotions is because growing up, we observed our caregivers suppressing their own emotions, and children are like sponges. And so we tend to absorb whatever is happening in our environment. We're dependent on our environment, and particularly our caregiver, for our ability to regulate. And so if we observe our caregiver suppressing their own emotions, we will pick up those patterns. And so a big thing that I do with my clients is help them start to process their emotion, but it's very difficult, particularly because there's this conditioned guilt associated with simply feeling and releasing their emotions. And they go to face their emotions, and there's just some wall that kicks in that it's like, I don't know, it's not safe, or we don't need to do this. It's hard. But anyway, but how do you let them process? You have to face them fully and not suppress them. Yankee 610 says, can you talk about caffeine usage with DPDR? Is it good or bad, or does it depend on the person? That's a great question. Yeah, so caffeine is a sympathetic nervous system stimulant. And so depersonalization, realization are due to traumatic stress. They are trauma coping mechanisms. Trauma is a state of overwhelm in the nervous system. And DPDR are dissociative symptoms that are designed to separate you from either your body or from the material world, because you're so overwhelmed that your brain thinks that you're being eaten by a lion. And so if you're at a state of traumatic stress, do you really want to add more stress by drinking caffeine? Now, I drink caffeine. In fact, my wife and I just had an amazing morning coffee together, and we were just talking about our life and planning. And by the way, it's really important if you're with somebody, especially married, that you do spend time, at least a couple times a week, just talking about your life. And you know, especially if you're married with kids, obviously it's relational, but there's kind of a business element to it as well. It's almost like running a business. You got to make sure that the house is clean. You got to make sure that the clothes are taken care of, the kids are taken care of, the finances are taken care of. You got to make sure that you're, you know, investing enough time in this thing and that thing. And you need to talk about these things. And my wife and I have learned, like, we need to sit down and make sure that we're managing our lives effectively. We did that this morning, and it was wonderful. But anyway, I enjoy coffee, but there was a while during my recovery where I didn't drink coffee at all. And typically with my clients, I'll tell them probably want to hold off on that. Or it depends on how much they're drinking, right? Because, if you're drinking 5 cups a day, that's different than if you drink half a cup a day, right? Phil G says, I know I'm there in terms of coming out of this, but just not quite there yet. I drink coffee in the morning and then work out, makes my DPDR worse. Yeah, so that's a lot on your body first thing in the morning, And I remember whenever I was going through DPDR the second time, I would drink a little bit of coffee, and it would trigger my DPDR. But I liked the coffee because it made me more awake, and I was having to wake up early for this job that I was at. So it was kind of like this Achilles heel. It was like, but I eventually had to stop, unfortunately. Yeah, and I don't know that working out in the morning is probably best. I'd probably wait until afternoon if you can. What's up, AJ? Good to see you. So Brandon says, did you ever feel almost confused during DPDR, like trying to comprehend normal stuff and things was difficult and just felt off all the time? Yeah, for sure. And that's not necessarily connected exclusively to depersonalization realization. Whenever you're in a trauma state, you're going to feel disconnected from a lot. There's a series of brain structures. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk calls it the mohawk of self awareness. And I'm not going to try to name all of them because there's like 4 or 5 different brain structures. But these brain structures shut down during a trauma state. And these brain structures are responsible for our sense of connection to our body as well as the material world. And that's what produces depersonalization realization. I talk pretty in depth about this in one of my videos. I think it's like 15 severe symptoms of depersonalization or something like that. I tell the exact brain structures and kind of go into it. But yeah, whenever those parts of the brain are not lighting up, and we have brain scans that show this, you're going to feel very, very detached from a lot of things. And that includes yourself, people, your environment. Yeah. So that was very, very common, Brandon. Good question. What if I got depersonalization from meditation? Could it be enlightenment? That's a great question. So I've had the opportunity to work with, I think, 3 former monks in my career. And one in particular that I worked with the most recently said that, he moved to this country. It was like in the middle of nowhere. I forget. It was like a war-torn country. But anyway, but they had like a monastery or something, and he would sit and meditate for like 12 hours a day or something. And there were a lot of other monks as well. And what he told me is that his meditation was really one giant dissociative experience. Now, obviously, not all meditation is like that. A lot of meditation includes interoception, the experience of the embodied self. But the meditation that he was doing was literally just putting him in his head. And he was not interoceptive, and he wasn't getting better. But he just kept doing it because it's like, surely if I move into the middle of nowhere and join a monastery and just sit and meditate all day with a waterfall in the background, surely that's going to heal my trauma and make me better. But he said it actually made him worse. And he said the other monks as well that were a part of that, they were all very traumatized and dissociated, and it wasn't helping them. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm just telling you what he said, all right? I'm sure that there are monks and people who meditate who have great results, but trauma is a body that is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes. And in order to heal trauma, we've got to get you back in the body, which is interoception, the experience of the embodied self. And we have to befriend the body and release the buildup in the body. And unfortunately, a lot of meditation, it really just kind of keeps you in your mind. And it doesn't include the body. And what's interesting, especially in the Western world, we've separated the mind from the body. And like, for example, mindfulness, right? If you look up mindfulness, it's typically about kind of observing, thoughts, befriending thoughts. It's about the mind, mindfulness, right? But if you look at the origin of mindfulness, it actually came from Buddhism. And in Buddhist practice, they would first start by getting in tune with the body and befriending the body. Whenever they're doing mindfulness, they would first start with the body, and then they would go to the mind. So, they didn't see the mind and the body as separate. But anyway, they would calm the body before they would try to calm the mind. But in the Western world, we kind of worship the mind, and we think the mind is the source of all of our problems. Whenever really most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, mind issues, whether it's anxious thoughts or irrational thoughts or just mind issues, are biologically correct for the state that our body is in. Edmund Jacobson, who created progressive muscle relaxation, he says, you can't have an anxious mind and a relaxed body. And people get so triggered when I say that thing because they're like, oh, it can't be that easy. You try getting into a relaxed muscle body. It takes sometimes my clients 6 months. I mean, it's hard to get into a calm body. First, you got to get in tune with your body, and then there's tons of buildup of tension, adrenaline, emotion. Maybe you've got some somatic triggers, a heartbeat phobia, or you're just afraid to be embodied. Getting into a relaxed muscle body is extremely difficult, and you've got to make lifestyle adjustments sometimes. Sometimes you're working yourself too hard. But what I will tell you is my own experience, as well as working with a lot of people, would tell me that the more that you get your body where it needs to be, the more that your mind will be where you want it to be, as far as being able to think clearly and not be dominated by anxious thoughts. And like my wife and I, we were just talking about a very big challenge that we're facing right now, and I'm not anxious about it. I'm not. And it's because I'm in such a calm body that I'm able to think. My prefrontal cortex is online. Logical, critical, creative, contextual thinking. Yankee says, do you think massage therapy can help your path to recovery? Yeah, of course. I mean, anything that's going to calm the body and release the buildup from the body is a huge win for sure. Okay, David. Okay, I've glanced at your message and I've got some thoughts on it. Thanks for sharing this, David. So you said DPDR for 3 years now. I beat it 6 months with exercise alone. This time I can't beat it. Both times I had a lot of supplements. Can SSRI help? Okay, so what I think you're saying is that you beat personalization realization with exercise after about 6 months at some point in the past. But my argument would be that you never actually beat it, because my definition of truly beating the symptoms is whenever you've gotten to the root. And while exercise is definitely positive for sure, what about getting in tune with your body, building interoception? What about releasing the tension, adrenaline, emotion from the body? What about making lifestyle adjustments to mitigate fatigue? What about sleep? What about nutrition? What about getting proper scientific education about what's going on to detach fear and shame from the symptoms? What about your focus? What about your routine? What about work-life balance? There's so much that goes into recovery in terms of long-term recovery. And there's not one thing that's ever going to get you long-term recovery. Sometimes there is one thing that will temporarily get rid of the symptoms or mitigate the symptoms, but don't confuse that with long-term recovery. And a lot of people think that they're recovering over and over again. And I'm like, no. True recovery is when you've dealt with the root, right? And I'll also add co-regulation for most people is going to be really paramount as they're learning to self-regulate. And that's really where you work with a safe person who's going to be able to build hope during the process and guide you. Now, as far as, you asked, hold on one second. You asked, as far as SSRIs, I can't give advice on medication. So talk to a doctor about that, talk to a licensed mental professional, but no, I don't want to speak to that. There is a good book, though. It's called Lost Connections by Johan Hari. He's a British journalist, and he lists out a lot of research about anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications, studies that are kind of suppressed and reveal things that are quite interesting. And he also did a couple interviews on the Joe Rogan podcast, Johan Hari. He's done a couple TED Talks. By the way, Johan Hari has one of the best TED Talks on addiction. Go to YouTube, type in Johan Hari TED Talk addiction, and it's wonderful. He talks about how the opposite of addiction is connection. Anyway, thoughts on somatic exercises? Matt asked that. Well, yeah, so somatic means body. I mean, that's a big part of what I do, for sure. I teach my clients to build interoception, the experience of the embodied self, and then start to befriend the body and release tension, adrenaline, and emotion from the body. And so, yeah. And, Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's one of the top selling books on trauma, maybe ever. And the title really says a lot. The body keeps the score. Whenever you go through painful experiences, your brain is taking a snapshot of the sensory data around you and is encoding that in the brain as being associated with threat. And your brain assigns the procedure of fight, flight, or freeze response to that sensory data. And when you come across similar sensory data in the future, your body subconsciously goes into these defense mechanisms. And thus, trauma is not a past event. It is a present perception of threat where there is no threat, and your body preparing to address that perceived threat in the form of fight, flight, freeze response in the body. Simplified, I tell people trauma is a body that is constantly preparing for a threat that never comes. And that's why so many people stay stuck in trauma, is because they're not conveying safety to the body, right? Now, that's just one piece of it. We also need co-regulation. Again, we need proper scientific understanding. That's actually really important to detach fear and shame from the symptoms. We need to get back to living life, exposure. We need lifestyle adjustments to mitigate stress and fatigue. But the body side of things is really, really important. And it's hard to get back into the body whenever you've been somatically dissociated for a very long time. That's been the way that you've gotten back to balance, is to go up here. In fact, I tell people all the time, for a lot of people, their obsession with existence or their obsession with their health or various other things, it's really a dissociative outlet. It's really a way to stay stuck in your head, so that way you never have to face your body. In my training that I go over with my clients, I've got this training called the spectrum of dissociation. Dissociation means to sever or separate. It comes from a Latin root word. And when your body is full of pain, well, we're wired to get back to balance. We're wired to get back to homeostasis. We're going to find some way. And if we don't know how to regulate, if we don't know how to directly calm the body and release the buildup in the body, the way that we get back to balance is through separating from our body. And yeah, depersonalization, feeling out of body, that's a trauma dissociative symptom, but we separate from our body in all kinds of ways. Scrolling through TikTok, scrolling through YouTube, scrolling through social media, watching Netflix over and over again, playing video games all the time, obsessing over existence or our health or people's opinions of us, living in the past, living in the future. Even some people throw themselves into their career or the ascertainment of academic knowledge. There was this trauma expert that I came across. He said, dissociation got me 2 PhDs. And he literally had 2 PhDs, which is absolutely insane. To get one is a huge feat. And the reason why he was able to get that is because he was so deep in his head and he had a very traumatic history, and that was his way to separate from his body. So the brain is very creative at finding a way to keep you separated from your body. And for example, somebody with health anxiety, I'm not saying it might not be its own issue, but a lot of times it's a dissociative outlet from their body. And you tell somebody that, you tell them, hey, the issue is not really health anxiety. The issue is that you constantly obsessing over catastrophic scenarios related to your health as a way to stay perpetually somatically dissociated. And they're like, no, I've got health anxiety. That's my issue. Sometimes what we think is the issue is actually a symptom of the issue. Oh no, I'm just obsessed with consciousness and existence and the afterlife and the nature of reality. I'm telling you, it's like, it just drives me crazy that we're living on this planet and we're just human beings floating around and that's my issue. How do I get over this existential obsession? And for a lot of people, I tell them, this may be a symptom of a much larger problem, which is that your body is a place of chaos, and you staying in your head, perpetually obsessing over existence, going from one existential theory or question to the next, to the next, to the next, is a way for you to never have to face your body. And that doesn't make you a bad person. And that's what I want to speak to really quick. We have to stop asking what's wrong with you, and we have to start asking what happened to you, right? What painful experiences did you go through that made it to where you need to live somatically dissociated, right? And even directly numbing the body, right? Drugs, alcohol, unhealthy food, there's all kinds of things that people do. That doesn't make them bad people. They're good people that have been through bad situations and a lot of pain, and they're just wanting to feel better. But what we need to do is we need to help you feel better in a way that's going to actually deal with the root, which is especially self-regulating, getting in tune with the body. Matt says, I can relate to the obsession with existence. Yeah, I'd say probably, just throwing out a statistic, 30% of my clients are dealing with existential obsession. I've got like a step-by-step framework for dealing with that too. But again, most of the time, if you really befriend your body and release the buildup, it'll indirectly resolve. Okay, I've got time for just a couple more. I've got to eat lunch with somebody. Johannes says, hey, Jordan, having trouble setting boundaries with roommates and finding myself with anger. It's not a nervous system war zone, as you put it. Any tips for learning to be more present in the moment to put up boundaries? Great question. So, first of all, a nervous system war zone is an environment that is highly chaotic, unstable, unpredictable, aggressive, or punitive. And punitive meaning that you get consequences that are disproportionate to whatever the infraction was, meaning you just make one little small mistake and some person gives you this crazy consequence. It especially happens when there's an abusive situation. And highly, highly chaotic, highly aggressive, highly punitive. Every environment can occasionally be punitive, aggressive, unstable, unpredictable, right? But if you're in an environment where these things are constant, that's called a nervous system war zone. It's either coming through a person, a group of people, or a job usually. You can't outregulate a nervous system war zone, meaning the environment is so dysregulating that you do need to go ahead and walk away from that environment. And for some people, their recovery from stress, anxiety, or trauma is on hold until they get away from these nervous system war zones. And so if you're in a nervous system war zone, I know that it's not easy to get away from that. And it may take you 6 months. It may take you a year to do what you need to do to get out of that environment. You may have to change jobs. You may have to get a divorce. You may have to break up. You may have to go through some conflict. Maybe it's family members. Maybe it's your mom or your dad or brother or sister. Just somebody is just bringing constant stress and chaos into your life. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I'm saying you have to make a choice. What do you want more? Do you want to appease them by allowing them in your life, or do you want to be calm? Because you can't have two. The two are mutually exclusive. They're not synonymous. You can't stay in a nervous system war zone and have a calm nervous system. It's just not going to happen. That's like stepping in. That's like saying, you know what? I would love to be able to step into a snake pit and be calm. No, it's a snake pit. It's very stressful, right? Now, with that being said, what you're saying, Johannes, is that you're not dealing necessarily with a nervous system war zone, but you are in a situation where people, your roommates, are not honoring your boundaries. And so I've encountered this a lot with people, particularly college students that I work with. You know, let's say you've got like 4 people in one, room or whatever, or maybe just family members, whatever. They're just not really honoring your boundaries. I relate this to the same approach with bullying. The way to keep people from bullying you is to make it extremely uncomfortable for them to bully you. And typically, if you allow it once, it's probably going to continue. And if you have allowed it, you're going to have to go through a pretty big conflict to get it to stop. And so long term, whenever it comes to your boundaries, and we'll also connect this to bullying, even though it's unrelated, I want to mention that too, you have to shut it down the first time. Because whenever people cross your boundaries and you allow it, there's a neural connection that is formed in their brain that says this is okay. But if you've allowed it to happen, now you have to go through the painful process of retraining their neural pathways in their brain. And it's going to be very difficult. But You don't have to be aggressive to communicate boundaries. I think that's why a lot of people are afraid of boundaries, is they think that they have to be overly aggressive, and you don't have to be. What I always say is use the sandwich method. So one positive, one negative, and then another positive. So for example, I'm making something up. Let's say that your roommate keeps leaving their clothes all over your side of the house or apartment, whatever. Hey, John, first of all, I want to say, man, I'm so glad that you're my roommate. You're awesome. Very thankful for you. I did want to mention, you do tend to kind of leave your clothes on kind of my side of the house, and it's making me have to do like a bunch of extra chores and stuff. If you wouldn't mind, just please pick that up from now on. And once again, super excited to know you, love you, just really wanted to communicate that to you. If they're a reasonable person, they're going to respond to that and be like, okay, yeah, sorry about that, no problem. Now, if they're a jerk and they're especially like an abusive person, well, then they're not going to respect your boundaries. But I found most people, especially if you communicate it in a way that's kind, they're going to be reasonable and they're going to understand. Now, there's always going to be that person every now and then that they're going to get triggered by your boundaries. And if that's the case, you just have to accept that. And that situation revealed that person is probably not good to connect with anyway. So it's a good thing. But most people will respect your boundaries, but you also have to be prepared because some people will not respect your boundaries. And that is usually why people don't have boundaries, is because at some point they had boundaries and there was a toxic person or abusive person that made them feel guilty or weaponized their boundaries against them, gave them disproportionate consequences. And so as a defense mechanism, they turn into a people pleaser. I don't want to feel that pain again, so I'm just going to do whatever anybody wants. You become a yes man or a yes woman. You can't do that. Boundaries have a cost, but you have to make a choice. This is what I tell people. Like you can waste your life. You have a choice with the life that you live. This is about transitioning from an external locus of control to an internal locus of control. An external locus of control would indicate it's really a belief system that my state is due to things like fate and luck and all these things that I have no control over. An internal locus of control would say, you know what? I determine my own destiny. I determine my own reality. And I am in control of a lot of what happens to me. And I'm going to make things happen. I'm going to make adjustments. And when it comes to boundaries, what I've even found is a lot of good people may accidentally override or violate your boundaries because they just don't know. So that's why you've got to learn to politely communicate your boundaries, because some people may not even know that there's that boundary there. So how can they know to follow it if they don't even know about it? But especially if there's toxic or abusive people that want to come into your life, you have to practice communicating your boundaries. And I'm naturally a very agreeable person. I took a personality test. It was actually Jordan Peterson's personality test. And I was kind of shocked because it said that I was very high in agreeableness, which I kind of knew. But it also said that I was equally high in assertiveness, which was very, very interesting. Because I used to be just a complete pushover, people pleaser, with no boundaries, let people run all over me. And now, if you knew how much I do not let any of that happen. I have very strict boundaries. I don't let anybody run all over me. If I even slightly detect that somebody's trying to bully me, I will shut that down so fast. I will make it so miserable that they will never do it again. So assertiveness for me was a learned trait. It's not natural for me. I hate conflict. Conflict makes me so stressed out. I am just not that guy. I do not thrive off conflict. And so that's one reason why it was so hard for me to have boundaries, because sometimes, especially if there was a toxic or abusive person, it did, involve a conflict. But I started to realize, okay, if I'm willing, let's say there's a toxic or abusive person that's wanting to cause chaos in my life. If I go through this temporary period of stress, standing up in my boundaries, I have now shut that door to that toxicity or that abuse in my life, and I never have to deal with it again. So especially putting up boundaries with toxic or abusive people, you have to be willing to go through that short-term stress and conflict to have that long-term peace. And a lot of people are only thinking in the short term, yeah, but it's going to upset them and I'm going to have to go through this, and this. Yeah, you will. But in the long term, you're going to have peace and it's worth it. The short term hell is worth the long term heaven. But again, you also need to understand, just because somebody in your past, a toxic or abusive person, got all pissed off whenever you had a boundary, doesn't mean that most people are going to be like that. And also, again, if you can communicate your boundaries in a kind way, you do the sandwich method, one positive, one negative, one positive, 99% of people are going to respect that. So don't not have boundaries with anybody just because one person 5 years ago was a douche canoe and made you feel guilty or came against you because you had boundaries. Don't collapse the whole category of boundaries just because of one toxic or abusive person in your past. Boundaries are a prerequisite to having a calm nervous system, right? And see boundaries as just communication, right? All right. No, this today wasn't a 15-minute. I was gonna do a lot more today. I do have to go though. I've gotta meet with a friend for lunch. Douche canoe. Yeah. By the way, you can take that. That's a really cool word. I learned it in high school, and I'm 35. I've been using it, so it's just a good way just to. Happy to help, Yankee. And Johannes, I'm glad that helped you too. All right, guys, I do have to go. I'll be doing lots more of these. As always, if you would like to work with me, there is a link in any of my videos. Watch the 5 Shifts Masterclass. It's free. 5 Shifts Deal from Trauma, Anxiety, Panic, and DPDR. It's going to show you the basics for free. There is a link, a button to click on if you want to apply to work with me and my team to help you get in tune with your body, self-regulate, and rewire your nervous system. Now, we got a pretty... There's like 3 different things you have to do before we can work with you to make sure that we're a good fit, that you're a good fit. But we'll do everything we can, and we'd love to consider taking you on as a client. And that's what I spend most of my time doing in my RISE program, is working with people one-on-one. And so if that's you, we'd love to take a look at your situation. All right, guys, that's it. No problem, Yankee. Thanks, Hafsa, Phil, King, Johannes, Jake, Pablo, Dickie, Matt. You guys have a good day. We'll talk to you real soon, okay?